Signore e signori, grazie a nome di tutta la nostra comunità per la vostra presenza qui dall'Accademia Britannica, il nostro centro di eccellenza per ricerche nelle scienze umane, di lettere e delle belle arti. Accogliervi qui stasera ci dà il più pieno piacere. It's a pleasure, a privilege and a joy for me to be able to welcome back to the British School at Rome tonight's prestigious speaker, Professor Mary Jacobus, for the book launch of her superb and beautiful new monograph. Mary is Professor Emerita of English at the University of Cambridge, and before that was Professor Emerita at Cornell in New York. To read the CV of this particular English professor is itself to engage with a formidable text. She has left an extraordinary trail of publications in her wake, and I have a list 4 pages long in front of me to prove it. She's flown into double figures on her monograph tally, writing widely and brilliantly on feminism, romanticism, and visual art. To cite them all would be cumbersome, so tonight we concentrate on one, her latest work, Reading Cy Twombly, Poetry in Paint, which was published with Princeton University Press earlier this year, a work that examines what it means for an artist to bring poetry into painting and drawing as Twombly's own artistic practice so interestingly accomplished, and to see what it might be when the artist draws on poetry and how this might broaden the scope and opportunities of abstract painting. Whilst rattling through Mary's extraordinary accomplishments, I'd like to briefly to mention how much she has given back through her many professional activities as a much cherished teacher, directing research centres, but also providing an important voice on many of the committees of funding bodies, from European Research Council to the AHRC, to which so many of us are indebted. She has rightly been widely recognised with awards and honours across the United Kingdom, Australia, Italy, Norway, Denmark, China, Canada, and the United States of America, and has even caught the eye of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who awarded her a CBE for services to literature. We feel that there is nowhere more appropriate than the British School at Rome to celebrate and acknowledge her latest work. Mary is a great friend of the BSR. We were delighted to have her with us in these corridors as independent visiting fellow in 2013, and she's also fellow of our parent body, the British Academy, since 2009, and we're extremely grateful to the kind and important support that you have provided us in recent times. Many of Mary's grants have also been issued for reaching across borders of between disciplines as well as nations, and for a strong interdisciplinary collaborative outlook, something that we energetically share and foster here at the British School at Rome. Also worth saying finally that the subjects of tonight's talk, Cy Twombly, like so many of the artists that the British School at Rome has supported in this
drawing. Now, one of Twombly's early mentors, writing a reference for him, called him a poet in paint, and that's the title of my book. Later, Octavio Paz, the poet, invoked Baudelaire's account of the painter as a universal translator. The painter translates words into visual images, wrote Paz. The critic is a poet who translates words and colours into images. Twombly's practice offers one way to think about the intriguing relation between text and image, painting and criticism, particularly art criticism. What does it mean, one might ask, to read a painting? What does it mean to read a painting? So my title of my book is Reading Cy Twombly, and that's something the book tries to investigate. Now, I'm just going to talk about one mainly one painting today because it's a big painting. It has a lot in it. And the painting is a multi-layered, immense, and multi-temporal painting that now forms the centerpiece of the purpose-built art gallery, Renzo Piano's airy Twombly Pavilion at the Menil in Houston. And the painting is Say Goodbye, Catullus, to the shores of Asia Minor. I'll call it Say Goodbye. So you can see how big it is there. You can't really even get it in, and you have to have 4 fold-outs in the catalogue raisonné to represent this long, long, huge painting. It's an installation photo, and the effect of Twombly's tall, elongated, and some would say sublime canvas is both puzzling and dazzling. It's about 16 meters long, 4 meters high, and consists of 3 panels. So it consists of 3 linked panels, and it involves a double spectatorial perspective, that is, both distant and close up. At a distance, it's dazzling, an explosion of blazing color on the right progresses towards the northern pallor of the left-hand canvas, and that's a long view, much reduced in size. Puzzling because close up, the viewer confronts illegible scribbles of poetry, phrases and passages in Twombly's inimitable scrawl. In conversation, Twombly remarked, "For sure, it is a passage through everything." Hence my title, Twombly's Mediterranean Passages. And here is the right-hand panel and the center, and here is the pale left-hand panel. I don't know if you can see that. How would you like a little less light? Little less light? It's very, very pale until you get close up. Now, at its first New York showing on the occasion of Twombly's 1994 MoMA retrospective, the still untitled painting, which was actually called Untitled Painting, like many of Twombly's paintings, was displayed in a long, narrow space. Viewers had to walk its entire length to see it in detail or even get any impression of it. Twombly intended, he said, intended to be read from right to left. In other words, his painting, in some sense, does ask to be read as well as seen. What happens when we try to read it? Or should we even try? Twombly began Say Goodbye in 1972 in Rome. He continued it in 1982, and he completed it in 1994 in America, in Lexington, Virginia, where he had come from and where he went back regularly at intervals. He completed it in a warehouse. Its making records a history of difficulty and delay. The painting originally consisted of first one and then a second panel, with the third right-hand panel added in 1994. By then the painting had come to seem to Twombly himself a kind of retrospect, a backward look, if not at his life. By then he was 60 years old, in his mid-60s actually, 65, perhaps also a retrospect on his artistic career. As some of you probably know, Twombly made his first crossing to Italy in the early 1950s on a fellowship with Robert Rauschenberg. The trip included another crucial crossing to North Africa, to Morocco. In the late 1950s, he returned to Rome, and although he made Rome his home, he continued to cross and recross the Atlantic throughout the 1960s. He also traveled extensively in the Eastern Mediterranean and what he called Asia Minor, prompted partly by his lifelong interest in archaeology. Say Goodbye speaks to this history of crossings and especially the significance of the Mediterranean. He called himself a Mediterranean painter. And I think it contains the motif of voyaging in time and space. The canvases of Say Goodbye moved with Twombly, rolled up, marks and scuffs record their travels alongside other markings, scribbles, incised boat shapes, drips of colour over painting and erasure. For Twombly, the unfinished painting was associated with inertia and melancholia, as if becalmed at sea. With hindsight, it became a kind of diary of times past and passing, a tissue of visual and textual self-quotations associated with the Mediterranean imaginary. Twombly tried out various titles over the years: Anatomy of Melancholy, after Burton's immense compendium of quotations, and On Mists of Idleness. A telling phrase comes actually from a sonnet by Keats, The Human Seasons, a poem Twombly had often quoted in drawings and on canvases during the 1960s. And then later, he settled on a lightly edited line from Catullus's poem number 46, a poem of setting out and return. And that's your first quote: "Now sweet smelling spring has come." Twombly, however, changes plains to shores, Campi to Aicora, investing the reference with nostalgia for the Eastern Mediterranean. He said, "The sound of Asia, Asia Minor, is really like a rush to me." Investing it with nostalgia and also with ideas of departure and loss, conflating a poem of departure in spring with the very moving elegy 101 for the death of his brother, where the Aicora comes from. And he himself said, you can just visualize his brother by reading that line. You know the line: "Say goodbye, Catullus, to the shores of Asia Minor. It's so beautiful." This is still Twombly. "Just all that part of the world I love." And again, he wrote, he said, saying goodbye to something and coming back on a boat. As you see, he's collapsed two poems. Twombly also said, the image came that is one of the really beautiful poems, one of the really beautiful lines. Lines have a great effect on painting. I want to suggest that this retrospect painting, that's been seen as recapitulating the successive phases of his painting career, expressive, romantic, impressionistic, and so on, doesn't just involve leave-taking and nostos, or homecoming. It also draws on fragments of the Twombly anthology, I'll call it, especially associated with the Mediterranean. The 20th century Greek poets Seferis, George Seferis, and Cavafi, Rilke's Duino elegies, and the poet and translator Richard Howard, whom I'll come back to later, a surprise, I think. The annotations on Twombly's immense canvas are hard to read unless you get up close, and sometimes not even legible. And this raises an obvious question: do his inscribed quotations matter? I want to argue that the painting contains a textual archaeology, an intricately braided text of Mediterranean cultural memory, along with its encrypted personal associations. While it seems to ask to be deciphered, it remains resistant to being read. It therefore raises intriguing questions about the aesthetics of quotation and the role of quotation in poetry and in painting. So my case study today is partly aimed at understanding the role of writing and especially loaded form of mark making in Twombly's painting. And I want to suggest that quotations sometimes offer him solutions to formal difficulties, blank spaces, disunified works, for instance. More importantly, quotation also engages the issue of what you might call his incomplete abstraction, what he called his incomplete abstractionism, that is his reliance on what, for lack of a better term, I'll call reference. I've always, he said, I've never really separated painting and literature because I've always used reference. This was also noted by the poet Octavio Paz, who collaborated with Twombly on an artist's book. Paz wrote about the tension between allusion and the unsayable. Painting is something that cannot say, except by omission and allusion, two words very applicable to Twombly, allusion and omission, what is alluded to and what is left out. Okay, I want to turn now to what I'll call time travel. Say Goodbye includes a number of Twombly's signature images: paint bursts, drips, ghostly galleys beetling across the empty Mediterranean, perhaps alluding to the Argonauts, the title of a poem by Seferis, referencing the expulsion of the Greek community from Turkey to 1922, and of course the long history of Mediterranean migration that continues tragically today across the Mediterranean. By this stage in Twombly's career, scribbled boat shapes had become a signature image. You can see them. For Twombly, the multi-oared galleys also evoked Egyptian Nile boats, bearing the bodies of the dead from one shore to another. The names of Egyptian deities are inscribed on the central canvas: Khonsu, meaning traveller, alluding to the passage of time; Amun, the hidden one, god of wind and air; and Mut, goddess of truth, balance, and order, who guides the sunboat across the sky and the dead across the Nile. So Mediterranean history and deep time come together. I'm not sure if this is, you can see these names of these Egyptian deities in this image, but maybe you'll be able to see them closer up later. The Nilotic associations of deep time had inspired Rilke's essay Primal Sound, an essay in which he connects the trace of sound, boatmen on the Nile, rowing in time to a song, and the traces of poetry. Now, a love of Rilke had been with Twombly since his very formative period at Black Mountain College with Rauschenberg. And someone has said, one of his contemporaries, it was impossible to leave Black Mountain College and not love Rilke. For those of you who don't know anything about Black Mountain College, it's a really fascinating coming together of artists and makers and dancers and thinkers, which was lucky enough to have people who were refugees from Europe, who came just before the war. By the 1950s, it was sort of peaking, and unfortunately it unraveled thereafter for financial reasons. In 1994, Twombly said that Say Goodbye concerned life's fleetingness. It's a passage, sealing its meaning by alluding to Rilke's ninth Duino elegy. On the left-hand edge of the central panel, he copied a pale inscription from Rilke's ninth Duino elegy, using translation by Stephen Mitchell. He owned numbers of different translations. Rilke's elegy charts a being in the world that is unique yet finite. Here is Twombly's transcription. Probably easier to see than this, but it's a transcription. And you can see how once is down there, once and never again, and then just once. And maybe it's just difficult. Those of you who write on the blackboard sometimes will know how difficult it can be to write on the blackboard. It's also difficult to write on a canvas pinned on the wall. It's the same kind of difficulty. So Twombly's transcription, and it's also your quote 2A on your sheet, comes from that. This fleeting world in some way keeps calling to us us the most fleeting of all, once for each thing, just once, no more, and we too, once and never again. So, for Rilke, of course, poetry tries to say the world, naming and celebrating it as only the poet can do, once for each thing. Readers often respond to Rilke as people have also responded to Catullus, quote, as if he addressed the most secluded parts of themselves. That's Paul de Man on Rilke, as if he addressed the most secluded parts of themselves. The last 4 lines of Rilke's 10th Duino elegy appear in or on a number of Cy Twombly's works during the 1980s, including his sculptures. These lines occur both on the lower left of the Tate version of Quattro Stagione's Primavera, and at the right-hand edge of the central panel of Say Goodbye, and you can see it again, these lines where a happy thing falls. So these are the lines. You who have always thought of happiness rising would feel the emotion that almost overwhelms us whenever happiness falls. And of course, falling was tremendously important for Twombly since paint flows downwards, and he really took advantage of that. And if you see photographs of his studio or workspaces after the canvases have been taken down, you can see the trickles on the baseboard. But that using natural gravity was important to him. And that's to be on your sheet of quotations. In his 9th Duino elegy, Rilke's traveller brings back not just the uniqueness of experience, once for each thing, but the intensity of their saying, their one-time experience. A word, when the traveller returns, he brings not a handful of earth unsayable to others, but instead some word he has gained, some pure word, the yellow and blue and gentian. That's Rilke. These are the colours, of course, the yellow and blue and gentian that bloom so vividly on the right-hand panel of the right hand of Twombly's central canvas. Onceness, you might call it onceness, emphasised in Twombly's shaky scrawl, becomes the inscription of the painter's unique realisation of the world in the process of mark-making, its indexicality, to use an art criticism term. As Cy Twombly wrote in his very early 1957 manifesto, each line is now the actual experience with its own innate history. It is the sensation of its own realization. Each line is the sensation of its own realization. I understand this to mean that the artist, to refer to the artist's one-time only inscription of a mark, whether drawing, painting, or writing, as well as a memory trace or a mnemonic techne. I've been talking about temporality and time and onceness. I want to talk about the quotations now. Because of the boats, said Twombly. Twombly told Nicholas Sirota, the director of the Tate Modern, all of the Tate actually, who has interviewed Twombly. Twombly told Sirota that the scribbled many-oared boats on his canvas were his solution to the problem of finishing the long, uncompleted painting, Say Goodbye, because of the boats. As often in his work, boats provide a directional pointer, backward or westward, but his boats come bearing quotes, freighted with passages of poetry. The writer W.G. Sebald says in one of his books, quotation unites time recounted and the time of culture. Time recounted and the time of culture. I think a very profound observation. I want to do a little backtracking here. In 1993, Twombly embarked on an ambitious quartet of paintings. He loved to paint sets. Quattro Stagioni, painted during 1993 to 4. One version of the quartet hangs in the Tate Modern and the other in MoMA. Well, it doesn't hang in MoMA because they're not hanging it at the moment. Stylistically, it anticipates the right-hand panel of Say Goodbye with its dripping colours and paint-laden downward movement. Twombly's memorial painting for Lucio Amelio, his gallerist, also called Untitled, painting of 1993, painted the previous year, provided a nexus for both Quattro Stagioni and Say Goodbye. So let me follow the trail. That's the painting. And it's cut off at the top, you can see that's just how it is. There's lines written here, lines written here, lines written here. It contains, as you can see, a lot of blank space and 2 funerary boats alight with flaming torches as if bearing the body to its burial. On these blank spaces, Twombly has inscribed passages from George Seferis's 3 Secret Poems. 3 Secret Poems was written in 1966. He's using a little-known translation by someone called M. Byron Rises from a book called Greek Poetry Translations, published in the 80s, 1983. Twombly's paperback edition of Rises is heavily marked with line-by-line revisions, scribbles, and with paint, as if he worked with the book in his hand. Here is a page annotated boat for Lucio. Okay, boat for Lucio. The light as a pulse continues slower and slower, you think it's about to stop. These are the lines of, and here's a transcript of the passages that Twombly uses on this painting. Down here. Okay, those are the lines. These are the lines of gloomy text that Twombly refers to. The light as a pulse, continually slower and slower. You think it's about to stop. Remember, this is a painting in memoriam of a dead man. And elsewhere, Twombly marked other lines that he included in the painting. Years ago, you said, fundamentally, I am a matter of light. The dead man is called Lucia. For the artist, of course, light and life are synonymous as the sun's pulse slows towards death. Light's pulse, visibility, and painting's commentary on itself come together. On another page of Rise's translation, we could see Twombly revising Rise's metrically predictable midline caesura using a method at once simple and drastic, that is, cutting the second half of each line. Here is the last section of On Stage, which is the second poem in the 3 Secret Poems, and you can see he's crossed out the lines that make it sort of cumbrous and flabby as poetry, and what is left is stripped down to the bare minimum. Yet there on the other shore, and I'll show you the transcript here, on the other shore under the black glance of the cave, suns in your eyes. I'll just read what is left. You can read for yourself in quotation 3a, the original. What Twombly has done is cut it so that we're left with something quite different. Yet there on the other shore under the black glance, suns in your eyes, you were there. Of the other labour, the other dawn, the other birth, yet there you were, in time's excessive, moment by moment, like. So you have this dangling like in Twombly's transcription. And all of Seferis's references to very personal experiences, pain, love, presence, stalactites, resurrections, have been cut completely. Now, other lines from Rice's translation were quarried for tortured phrases inscribed on quattro stagioni. In Rice's introduction on the nature of literary translation, Twombly has circled the word anaplasis. Otherwise, a fairly traditional translator in his approach, Rice allows himself the idea of remoulding and recasting the language of the original when he had to. Perhaps Twombly took this as a hint for his own high-handed editorial practice. I think what's important to stress here, this is not Twombly's defective memory, but he worked on the text. He prepared on the page what he then put onto the painting. Now, getting rid of the personal details in Sir Ferris's poem Pain, Love, etc., along with the specificity of stalactites, like a stalactite, a stalagmite, what a terrible line, getting rid of them produces a kind of decontextualized floating memory, first appropriated in for Lucio Amelia's elegy in Untitled. As we've seen, I'll just take you back to it. It's at the top there. At the top there, you can see like, okay? First appropriated for the painting in memory of Lucio, and then reappropriated as if now applied in some way to Twombly himself when he came to complete the right-hand panel of Say Goodbye in 1994, the following year. So here it is on the on Goodbye, Say Goodbye, Catullus. And here you can see the huge word time. And the passage this time, as recycled in Say Goodbye with the words vast and time enlarged, dwarfing the tiny drop by drop. The passage it's revised as if with hindsight, the expansion of time had become the main meaning for Twombly himself, a kind of shorthand for time's passage. Poetry signifies movement across time and space, as Rilke had written apropos of the Nile rose, an expression of longue durée, if you like, whether mythic, historical, or personal. As Twombly struggled with the recalcitrant summer estate of Quattro Stagioni, he complained, "All I'm doing is seeing yellow. I wake up in the morning and the white walls look yellow." He had a terrible time with it. On the upper right of the tape version, he inserted lines from an early poem by Sir Ferris, slightly and colloquially misquoted. "High on light, how the dizziness slipped away like a fish in the sea." And you can just see, high on light, how the dizziness slipped away like a fish in the sea. And this is from Estati in the Quattro Stagioni. And it's on your quotes, number 3B. These lines come from Automobile, a poem recalling Sir Ferris's clandestine love affair with a Greek woman writer. On a bed, the pillow, high and light, how the dizziness slipped away. The same lines reappear on the left edge of the central panel of Say Goodbye, the lover's pillow, casually spliced onto Rilke's Ninth Duino elegy. You can just see them. Those are the lines, high and light, how the dizziness slipped away. You can just see them here, beneath the oversized once, high on light, how the dizziness slipped away. And then there's the name of one of the Egyptian gods there, Khonsu. So a kind of collage of poetry has emerged there. The Sir Ferris of Three Secret Poems is the quintessential poet of secrecy. Encrypted references to circumstances in Sir Ferris' own life, images drawn from his dreams, allusions to his own poetry, all combine with references to Greek politics and political exile. He was exiled, the Greek government in exile moved to Egypt during the Second World War. Severus began 3 secret poems in his mid-60s, the same age Twombly was when he completed Say Goodbye. He began it after editing his own collected poems, so 3 secret poems was also a kind of personal accounting that spans the wintry ray of light and the purgative fires of midsummer. One can imagine many reasons why 3 secret poems appealed to Twombly: its Mediterranean associations, its retrospect, and its encryption of private meanings. In 3 secret poems, Severus had written, "Your life is what you've given. This void is what you've given, the blank page." Twombly has emphatically, that's quote 3C on your handout. Twombly has emphatically marked the passage in his copy. Severus goes on, "But if you trust the void," he says, "you may find there what you'd thought lost, the budding of youth, the just submersion of old age." Perhaps Twombly had this self-accounting in mind when he confronted the blank spaces, the omissions of Say Goodbye. Defining the way his poems were secret, Severus came up with a series of terms: secretive, yes, but not secret in the sense of mystica, or arcane. I suggest that for Twombly, afflicted by a lifetime of concealment, Severus's poetry spoke to him of his own struggles, as well as the task of turning his unfinished painting into a retrospect on his life and painting, as he looked back across the Mediterranean over almost 25 years from the vantage point of the MoMA retrospective in 1994. I want to go a little deeper into this. I asked earlier how you respond to passages that quote in the vast white expanses of Say Goodbye. Should we step closer to decipher them, or treat them as incidental to overall effects of space, colour, and emptiness? Linked by the repeated O's of Orpheus's name and the O's of once, as you've seen, once, Twombly's tissue of quotation starts to look like a kind of hypertext designed to knit the painting together with a fragmentary web of written words. A disconcerting perspective on Twombly's eclectic working habits emerges from a Vogue article published in 1994, just as Twombly was having such problems completing Quattro Stagioni and already anticipating his MoMA retrospective. As he struggled with the yellow Estati, his Vogue interviewer noted that he was working with a book open beside him. As we now know, it was Rice's Greek poetry translations. And I'm not going to quote the article. Several lines of stanza, this is the introduction in the articles, I'm quoting the articles, several lines of one stanza have been altered by Twombly, writes the interviewer, with some words inked out. A section of the edited and spliced poem with a few new words added by Twombly is written on the canvas of summer in Twombly's inimitable childish scrawl. And then there's a transcription, as you see there, the shard of white trembling with white light, with white flat sea, distant in memory, between the deluge of life, our dearest, our white youth, our snow-white youth, that is infinity. That's the Vogue transcription. I have to say that Twombly quite often blanked out things he didn't like, painted out and painted over it. Now, the paint stains and markings in Twombly's Greek poetry translations confirm this glimpse of the artist at work, but only the phrase distant in memory and between the deluge of life come from Severus's 3 secret poems. The other lines transcribed and cannibalized here come from C.P. Cavafy and mediated by Richard Howard from a famous passage by Baron Corver. To start at the end, Twombly's montage includes lines from Cavafy's early symbolist poem of erotic nostalgia, Our Dearest White Youth, grafted onto other lines that appear on the third left-hand panel of Say Goodbye, above a procession of scribbled boats in a patch of white paint tinged with lavender. Shining white air, trembling white light reflected in the white flat sea. Shining white air, trembling white light reflected in the white flat sea. And you can see the colours are not so great in this reproduction, but they are kind of wonderful lilac colour. How am I doing? Oh. Cavafy's Our Dearest White Youth is absent from the visual field of Say Goodbye, but its sighing after white youth is inscribed on the yellow-streaked lower right-hand margin of the Tate Estati. And you can just see it there, white light, it goes there, etc. It culminates in it goes, is lost in white horizons, goes forever. It's hard to imagine that these lines weren't still in Twombly's mind when he came to finish Goodbye, and here's the whole poem. Our dearest, our white youth, our snow white youth, that is infinite and yet so brief, it melts and faints among white horizons. It goes there, is lost in white horizons, goes forever. This is Cavafy. It's on quote 4. We know that Twombly loved Cavafy, and one of his editions contains his drawings and annotations. He must have read Auden's translation to Dalvin's, Auden's introduction to Dalvin's translation of Cavafy, with its references to Cavafy's homosexuality. And he also loved the essay on Cavafy, in which E.M. Forster paraphrases Cavafy's poem, Understanding, and Forster writes that the amours of youth create the future and may give to an aging man perceptions he would never have known. That's Forster paraphrasing Cavafy. And in Understanding, Cavafy had written, the years of my young manhood, my sensual life, how plainly I see their meaning now, but I did not grasp their meaning then. Yet, writes Cavafy, it was then that the designs of my poetry took shape, the scope of my art was being plotted, and of course it's hard not to connect this with Twombly's early first visit to Italy with Reichenberg when they were lovers, and of course they remained very close friends throughout their lives. Well, this is the home stretch now, the coda, La Bella Noia. In the white expanses of Say Goodbye, Cavafy's lost erotic horizons disappear like a sigh, his answering Rilke's oh. But as Twombly transformed Say Goodbye from a record of inertia into a retrospective accounting of his life in art, he too seems to have looked back to his formative years and perhaps, as I said, his first arrival in Italy with Robert Reichenberg. Describing the colour of the Mediterranean, white, 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 Twombly must surely have been aware of others for whom its changing colour was perennially fascinating. In a famous passage from in Baron Corvo's Venice Letters, one of the most over-the-top descriptions of the Venice lagoon, the failed painter Frederick Rolf Baron Corvo describes the morning whiteness of the Venetian lagoon with its naked swimmers in saturated Paterian prose. At white dawn, when the whole world gleams with the candid iridescence of mother of pearl, glowing white flesh with green-blue eyes and shining hair poised in white air, trembling like song, it should be not posed but poised, I'm sorry, trembling like song in white light reflected in white smooth sea, poised in air like showers of aquamarines on a sapphire sea with shadows of lapis lazuli, poised in an atmosphere of lavender and heliotrope, limitless amethyst and far-reaching turquoise, and so on. Now, what is important is that though I'm sure he knew this passage, Twombly is not directly recalling Baron Corvo. It's an enormously famous passage. Much more interestingly, the lines he quotes in Say Goodbye come from a dramatic monologue by the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet and translator for Lombard, for instance, Richard Howard, a poem in which Howard cannibalizes Corvo's Venice Letters. Howard's poem 1889, Anasio, from his collection of dramatic monologues, Untitled Subjects, 1969, Howard's poem ventriloquizes a figure loosely based on the self-deceiving Baron Corvo, ironizing the speaker in Browning-esque fashion. Now, Howard describes 1889 Anasio as the poem he most cherished in Untitled Subjects because, he said, this is Howard, it concentrates all the attitudes and awfulness of homosexual life that I most deplored and feared in my future. Twombly may have been struck simply by the reference to the white light of the Mediterranean, but did he respond to something else, to the Mediterranean ennui attributed to Howard's Corvo-like speaker, an ennui one hopes he had avoided? The survival in Twombly's archive of his own transcription on a piece of squared paper, spotted with white paint, bearing a faint lilac smudge, you remember I mentioned the lilac paint on the left-hand panel, solves a crux at the heart of the white seascape of Say Goodbye. These are the lines that Twombly transcribes. Shining white air of afternoon is crossed out of afternoon, trembling in white light, reflected in the white flat sea, La Bella Noia, La Bella Noia. The context of these lines is the passage in Howard's long dramatic poem in which the speaker anticipates his betrayal by one of Corvo's naked bathing boys. Pippo has left me for the last time again. And here's the passage, it's quote number 5 on your page, your handout. White flesh with green eyes, frog green, shining like his hair in the white air of afternoon, trembling in white light, reflected in the white flat sea, La Bella Noia. You see, the consolations of tragedy are gone out of my life here. Farce is all I have, and a few poems to write. Now, Howard's mingling of tragedy, poetry, farce, and Mediterranean ennui, La Bella Noia, suggests the multivalent and multivocal texture of Twombly's poetic collage. His allusion to Howard's ironic repurposing of Baron Corvo may merely pick up its reference to the White Sea and to Mediterranean nostalgia. The painting remains enigmatic. Howard said that the real secret of the dramatic monologue is, quote, the secret that the speaker, who does not know it, must reveal. I want to conclude with just a very few remarks on interpretation and aesthetics. As secretive as Seferis, the consummate poet-politician, almost as secretive as Cavafy was forced to be about his homosexuality 100 years earlier, Twombly interweaves Seferis's cryptic Three Secret Poems with Cavafy's poetry of erotic longing and the irony of Howard's dramatic monologue. In doing so, his painting poses unresolved questions. What does Say Goodbye tell us about relations between writing and painting, or between interpretation and aesthetics? Why delve into Twombly's Mediterranean passages at all? We might start by asking the question, what constitutes the proper interpretive frame of reference for the work of art? Can its lost horizons ever be fully known and recovered? Whatever meaning or pleasure we take from a painting like Say Goodbye isn't reducible to its tissue of quotations or its invocation of Mediterraneity, or even to its biographical enigmas, still less to the literary sleuth's pleasure in tracking down sources. For some, Say Goodbye will always evoke the limitlessness of the great sea, or the painterly sublime. Unpacking the poetry in Say Goodbye confronts the viewer with a limit case, a horizon beyond which reading as such may no longer be possible. Painting comes up against the limits both of both verbal and non-verbal representation. Twombly's Mediterranean passages at once extend the possibilities of meaning-making in art and put them in question. Punctuating the emptied-out white spaces of Say Goodbye, his quotations become the fragile ciphers that stand between the painting and its forever lost horizons, metaphors, if you like, for the work, or in Baudelaire's sense, an endlessly receding vista of translation and untranslatability. And I'll just leave you there with the books on the shelf. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that extremely compelling analysis of the interactions between these two great arts, poetry and painting. It's fascinating, elusive painting, manipulations of text, image, time, light. It takes a cryptographer to make sense of a cryptographer. Thank you very much. I'll turn, I'm sure many of you would like the opportunity to pick Mary's brains a bit further. I'll turn to you for questions in a second. But just to begin with the conversation, since we are in Rome, and a lot of the research, one of the research themes of what we do here is to do with Rome as a place in the imagination. I'd like to sort of ask a bit more about what difference it made to Twombly his time in Rome. It was so interesting that he described himself as Mediterranean. Stressing his Mediterraneanity is really incredibly interesting and compelling. How does that sit with his Rome experience? He's such a successful transplant, bringing himself into the Roman cultural life. Is there a distinction? And how do you characterize the impact of it?
It's such a wonderful question. It's a huge question. I can't even begin to answer it, of course. But I think Twombly, when he first came in the early 50s, remember that was a time when Rome was recovering from the occupation and from the Great War. And he writes about going to the flea markets. In fact, Rajnav complained that he'd go off to the flea markets and spend all their money on the money of the fellowship. Though Rajnav also liked to collect bric-a-brac. But Twombly made another really interesting remark later in his life. He'd grown up in the South, in America, where there are enormous numbers of columns, pillars and columns. And he said, there are more columns in Virginia, where he grew up, than there are in Rome. And so, in some sense, I think he was enormously receptive to those two different extremes of what he found in Rome: marvelous architecture, the fragments of the past, and also the graffiti, the street life, the bric-a-brac, etc. When he came back as a young artist, not quite so young artist, the late 50s, things were picking up, and it was a very buoyant moment into the 60s in Rome. And he was, of course, blown away by the great cultural icons, the Renaissance paintings by Raphael in the Vatican, Stanza della Signatura. He did versions of those. He was a real student of painting. He looked at painting. He looked at architecture. He said once by himself he wished to be an architect, but he was never at math. So I think he was looking all the time, and he uses certain symbols about that are almost like signatures of Rome, a step. Of course, you're right at the top of a flight of steps, and you face the wiping great flight of steps up into the Bulgarian garden. He was both very, in very material ways, affected by Rome. I think he saw the walls as things to be written on. He treated his canvases as walls to be written on, and of course there are many examples all over Rome. both ancient and modern graffiti, and I'm sure he was very interested in the ancient graffiti as well as the modern. I'm not in that way a kind of historian of the art scene, but I think it was a very interesting sort of moment of arte povera, making use of stuff, ordinary stuff, and the same was going on in New York. What I think has to be said is that Twombly was always going to and fro. He painted a really disastrous series in 1964, about Commodus, who was a mad emperor, who really crazy, psychotic, schizoid, paranoid, etc., all the things we think of as Trump, actually. But he used to fight with his bare hands and so on. And he painted this strange series called Discourse on Commodus, which was a complete bomb. It just was a disaster. I mean, it was shown in New York, which by then was the era of pop art. However, I think that Twombly was in his own way, like Russian wrote, responding indirectly to what was happening in the Vietnam War, over the Vietnam War starting to gather momentum, and of course the assassination of Kennedy and many other events that were in pop art and in Reichenberg, images that were much more directly being represented. And I think in Twombly's own work, he did a series of One Morning 10 Years Later, a version of the Iliad, and then of course much later he did 50 Years in Ilium, which was a kind of shrinklet version, wonderful, huge series about the Iliad and the anger of Achilles. He was particularly interested in Achilles and the rage of Achilles. And he has an early 1960s representation of Achilles as a kind of flaming rocket, really, so flaming egg. So what I'm really saying is that I think he found both in Rome's past and Rome's literature ways in which he could express himself. And that's, I think, even though the Commodus series, which I really don't like, was a disaster, I think he was trying to do something interesting. I think he was seen as having kind of lost his way. And I think he also felt that, and he picked up again, very interestingly, in the end of the 60s by going back to the idea of writing, very abstract forms of writing, not actual words, in the great so-called blackboard painting. So that's rather a long answer, but I think he was, on one hand, immersed, and on the other hand, you can say he always stayed an American. He wasn't, I think, your average, I won't use the word, for him, expat. I think he was going to and fro all the time to America, staying in touch with what was happening, and recovering, often going back in order to go forward, solving problems by going back to earlier moments. And I think actually the Black Mountain College was tremendously formative, both for poetry, as I mentioned, and also for things that he and others did at that point in terms of their work. So there's an interesting kind of tension, if you like, between him being in Rome, but not really of Rome, and like anybody who's come to Rome, all of you, and I certainly experienced this myself, being both blown away and confused by the multiplicity of ruins, writings, inscriptions, great painting, great architectural spaces, and so on and so forth, which confront the painter with the question, what do I do? How to modernize it? How do I modernize this? How can I be a modern painter confronted with this incredible tradition? And I think Twombly's, one of Twombly's responses was to paint quite controversial paintings, what you might call, they're not even versions of, and I haven't got the pictures up, but you can see them in the book, of things like the paintings in some of the frescoes in the stanza of San Ventura, where he really kind of asks that question, School of Athens, for instance, what can the modern painter do? How do you make it modern? One answer, of course, is you make it flat. You talk about the surface of the painting, and that's another story. But I think that one can't underestimate that. There's a book to be written about it. I'm not the one to write it, but there's a book to be written about this. And of course, people have written in many ways about this subject. But
it is very interesting. To what extent it can become relevant in the dynamics of settlement and integration in this city for the reasons you described. And then a question from Mary.
yes. Yes, it's you.
I find it completely fascinating, the idea of what it means to read a painting. And just focusing on this one painting, how dense his reference material is, how he's taken some poems, deleted bits, but once he's placed it on the canvas, placed one line in between. Is he ever clearer? Is there ever any more clarity? You know, you just mentioned pop art, very clear, simple sentences. Is he ever less dense? Does he make it easier for us?
There are some particularly drawings actually where he really takes some trouble to copy out quotation from Rilke's sonnets, for instance, in German. And then he mostly he quotes from translations. I wish I could show you. There's one image in the book of a fragment from Archicus in a book that is relevant of Bronze Age poetry. When he goes through it, it's a fragment that consists of only a few words, and the rest is from another sort of translator. And he goes in, he crosses out the one extra line, which he had, I think, it's an indirect answer to the question. I think he had a tremendous sense of how to take out the unnecessary anchoring prosaic line. And I think he worked hard on that. I think the illegibility, the art of illegibility, is actually part of his art. I think he did a lot of painting out both images and clarity. I think that was on purpose. I think he was interested in how you thought through as you were working, and then included making it hard to read, getting rid of it. And I think it's an aspect of that, making it not only easy, but making it difficult. So, I think it looks so deceptively simple. It looks as though just an untidy and misremembering story. I think this is the arts of illegibility are part of Twombly's repertoire, actually. Does that kind of get at your question? Please. Yes. Yes. So maybe take that one first, and then you go.
Sorry. Shall I go first?
Right.
So it's kind of interesting to actually see the list of the text. There's this.
Can you speak up a little?
It's really interesting to see the text, especially the. Oh God, do I have to do that? Sorry, wait. Hello. Hello. It's really nice to have these texts printed out just to have a read. They're just incredibly beautiful bits of text, but I kind of, what is really the point in excavating so much to the point that there is a sentiment in which his work begins to maybe feel like illustration, and you kind of, to kind of, in a way, to delve so much into pinpointing exact words in the way that the paintings sort of obfuscate, do not allow you, intimate but do not fulfill, in this act of kind of going down there. I guess this is quite a personal question direct to your project, but is there some sense that, what is the conflict in reducing his work to illustration?
I think that's a very interesting question. I don't think he ever illustrates. I think it would be absolutely a mistake. I think the quotations are not a form of drawing. It would be one way to think about it. And what he does is collapse the things into different kinds of lines. One of the interesting ways to think about this would be to think about Dada, and Dada as dismantling text, dismantling images, turning it into kind of found objects, the notions at the beginning, and that dismantles kind of hierarchy. And I think that's involved in the quotations, the dismantling of kind of hierarchy. And I think the problem with illustration, the idea of illustration, is it suggests that one comes first and the other follows. And I certainly don't mean to suggest that at all. And the textual sort of archaeology, as I sort of tried to say at the end, people say, well, does it matter? Who cares? You still look at the painting, you see the painting, you pick up close and look at the text, does it make a difference? I think I wanted to point to, you mentioned cryptography. When Twombly did his national service, he was drafted into cryptography of the Pentagon, and he had written down, and got out, which is a good way to get out better than having bone spurs on your toes or something. But he did a lot of drawing at night in the dark, as sort of famous, trying to un-beautify his line. It's like automatic writing. And Mother, who was an important mentor and teacher for Twombly, was very, very keen on automatic writing, and as you probably know, Mother quipped abstract expressionism should be called automatic expressionism. He really thought that loosened up the intellectual, loosened up the sort of control of the mind on the line. And I think there's that element in Twombly's writing, the illustration of, say, once. I think that's a way of putting emphasis on it. I don't think that's illustration, it's a way of appropriating. There's some very interesting work on experimental translation, where people do it in different colors, different pictures, write it differently, and so on. And that's a sort of, it descends in a way from Dada's and Neodada way of thinking about translation itself. And I think Twombly is sort of doing that. I mean, it's not so different from Reichenberg's combines, taking a ready-made, putting something of the world into the picture, so that you no longer can say picture, world are completely distinct. They are something else. And I think the way to think, for me, the way to think of quotations is a bit more like the ready-made, and certainly dismantling the kind of reverence of the canon in certain ways by this editing, making it its own. Of course, when you try to elaborate or try to point out, you have to quote, you have to show, you have to give the original text. What I wanted also to do was to suggest, to go back to cryptography, that secrecy and concealment are also important. And Twombly may declare once, but there are other things that come out so indirectly. And poetry is a way to out something that can't be outed in any other way. I think attempts to assimilate Twombly to a kind of gay aesthetic is very anachronistic. I think he was a southern, it's not a southern gentleman or southern upper-class man. He didn't really think that was, I don't think he would like that way of thinking about art. But he certainly makes clear through poetry in many different ways, through the allusions, that he's picking up a homoerotic subtext, for instance, in Venus of the Dead. Many drawings repeats the subject, and you can see that. So I think his poetry was a kind of encryption of a very interesting kind, and the sorts of secrecy that you find in Cepherinus. I don't think it's an accident that those poems by Cepherinus were attractive to Twombly, because they were both intensely personal and intensely enigmatic, and effective. I think one thing that may not have come through, and I didn't want to dwell on it, but I think Twombly's paintings have a very powerful affective charge. People love them. Some people do. But I think he is always working with a very the sensation of the line in the making is also the feeling of the line in the making. So that would be my answer to that. I'm forced to be more cerebral, obviously, but I think that's the problem when you try to unpick something and I won't say look at the subtext, but look at the hypertext. I know if it answers your question.
Yeah.
Should we take one more question?
Well, just a simple question about the fact that I've been practically mesmerized by the constant reference of the poems, the Cavafy, the Howard, and the other one, the Seferis. Blank page, white, white, and white. And I wonder, since I seem to see a connection, I'm not an expert on this fantastic painter, but a connection between the white on the page as a non-color. Is it a non-color, or is it a color of nothing, nothingness? How do you feel about this constant? I mean, his paintings. The white is what I mean. I leave this room mainly with this sense of whiteness in my mind too. So can you say something or comment, or if do you think it needs delving into this kind of observation?
I think he was enormously influenced early in his career by Mallarmé and Mallarmé's blanks and whiteness. And he and Reichenberg started painting white paintings, some on them, I know they did it in the early 50s, and back on the painting white. Reichenberg was in black paintings, but painting white paintings, it goes on being enormously important. I'm very glad you picked that up. And of course the blank page, the white page, the Mallarmé's coup de day, with its sort of curious ascension of the sentence to the turning of the page in blankness, influenced Tommy enormously. And I think he has an early work called Poems of the Sea, which he painted at next to a little town next to Gaeta, when his wife was pregnant, actually, which is very clearly kind of Mallarmé in the sense that there are rows and rows of waves coming in, white paint, and different kinds of white paint, actually, cement paint, which is kind of creamy. But yes, you're absolutely right. And Edmund Leach has written, was asked to write about whiteness, because the whiteness of Seurat porcelain is very important to Edward Dewan, Edward Dewan. And in the forthcoming exhibition at the Pompidou, he has an essay on whiteness in importance of whiteness in comedy. So yes, you're absolutely right. This is hugely important.
My connection, and he looks were in America one day, although he called himself American. He calls himself a Mediterranean painter, which is strange. I mean, all this whiteness against this definition of himself. And if you think of the Mediterranean,
He says the Mediterranean is white, white, white.
Not realistic painter, but I mean, if you think of the Mediterranean, you think of a colorful kind of site, don't you? So there's sort of almost a contradiction. I was wondering whether being an American or Canadian? American. I mean, the white way, the insistence, the importance of white color. Death, in actual fact. In Western Europe, death is figured in black, whereas in America, literature, especially in the 19th century, is always white.
He made a very famous remark, actually. He said the color of the Mediterranean is always white, white, white. So
thought the color of the
white, white,
Mediterranean
white.
was white.
And he did paint it in many changing lights and colours in one way or another. And at the end of his life, he was living overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea at Gaeta. I don't know about the whiteness being American, but I think whiteness probably has as much to do with modernism, with Mallarmé's modernism, and with the idea of the white painting, but the idea of absence, of the omission, things left out, non-representation, and a tension between referentiality and non-referentiality, the void that he underlined the passages. So you're absolutely right, the blank is enormously important in the whiteness and power of these. I always get worried that they won't show up. Pale paintings. Actually, I had to show a few, in order to get the writing clearer, they're black and white images, a little bit less white. Many, as I say about Eskimos, many different shades of white.